For decades, America has been seen as the towering figure of global strength, the superpower that could bend the direction of history with its choices, and the nation whose influence extended into every market, every conflict, and every emerging frontier of technology. But here lies the paradox. What makes something appear invincible often blinds it to the reality of its fragility. America's image has been carefully crafted through its military power, cultural dominance, and financial reach. Yet beneath this image sits a foundation that is not as unshakable as it appears. The illusion of invincibility is not born from genuine permanence. It is born from the inability to imagine a scenario where the giant falls, and it is precisely this inability that exposes the greatest weakness. When a nation convinces itself that it cannot be challenged, it stops asking the most important question, what if? What if the economy that seems too strong begins to show cracks under debt and inflation? What if the technological edge that once separated America from the rest of the world becomes accessible to its rivals? What if its internal divisions weaken its capacity to act in unity when it matters most? The problem is not the presence of threats. It is the refusal to seriously consider them until they are unavoidable. In this arrogance, the illusion of invincibility takes root, creating a false sense of eternal dominance. Nations, like empires before them, fall not because they are weak, but because they believed they could never fall. History is merciless to those who ignore its patterns. Rome believed its borders were eternal until they collapsed. The British Empire thought its colonies would always serve until they demanded independence. Every empire that has claimed immortality has written its own death sentence by refusing to prepare for decline. America stands at this same crossroads, but unlike its predecessors, it faces a global stage where information, power, and wealth move faster than at any other point in history. The illusion of invincibility does not just blind, it accelerates the decline because it delays the recognition that urgent problems exist. And by the time recognition comes, the damage is no longer reversible. Consider the language often used. The greatest military in the world, the strongest economy, the leader of the free world. These are not lies, but they are incomplete truths. Military might cannot stop internal decay. A strong economy is still vulnerable to mismanagement and overreach. Leadership of the free world loses meaning when the citizens of that world begin to question whether freedom itself is still being protected. The illusion of invincibility thrives on half-truths, on constant reassurance that as long as America projects strength, it will never be broken. But the danger is clear. When projection becomes more important than reality, the truth is pushed aside and weakness grows unchecked. This illusion is also fed by comparison. America points to other nations, measuring its strength not by what it builds, but by what others lack. As long as its rivals appear weaker, America feels justified in believing its supremacy is unshakable. But measuring power only against others creates complacency. A nation does not fall simply because others rise. It falls because it stops improving itself while assuming it is already at the peak. The illusion thrives in this arrogance, whispering that past victories guarantee future dominance, even though history proves the opposite. The irony is that America's greatest achievements have always come not from a belief in invincibility, but from an awareness of vulnerability. The moon landing was born from the fear of falling behind. Technological revolutions were born from the urgency to innovate in the face of competition. Economic resilience was built on the lessons of the Great Depression. Every era of true strength came when the nation recognize its fragility, and work to overcome it. The illusion of invincibility strips away that urgency, replacing it with comfort, and comfort is the enemy of resilience. The weakness is not visible in the surface images of power. It is visible in the details. A society that drowns itself in debt because it assumes the dollar will forever hold supremacy. A culture that consumes endlessly because it assumes production will always keep pace. A political system paralyzed by division because it assumes the system itself can never truly break. These are not isolated flaws. They are symptoms of a deeper sickness, the belief that the system is too big to fail. Once that belief takes hold, decline becomes inevitable because no effort is made to prevent it. Even in moments of crisis, the illusion is preserved. When economic crashes occur, when wars strain resources, when global rivals grow stronger, the instinct is not to confront the weakness, but to deny it, to double down on the narrative of strength. This denial buys time, but not solutions. It creates a fragile surface of confidence, while beneath it, fractures deepen. The more America tells itself it cannot fall, the less it prepares for the possibility that it might. And when the unthinkable becomes reality, denial turns into desperation. The danger is not simply that America could lose its place as the global leader. The greater danger is that it could lose its ability to recognize when change is necessary. Power is not about the size of the military or the strength of the currency. It is about the adaptability to survive shifting realities. A nation trapped in the illusion of invincibility cannot adapt, because adaptation requires humility. To adapt, one must admit that the old ways may not work forever. But in America's self-image, the idea of decline is too painful to admit, and so the cycle continues. Power without preparation, dominance without discipline, strength without awareness of fragility. The illusion does more than hide weakness. It actively creates it. When leaders assume their systems will never collapse, they take risks they would never take otherwise. When citizens believe their way of life is untouchable, they consume and demand without considering long-term consequences. When institutions assume their authority is permanent, they grow lazy, inefficient, and corrupt. Weakness does not appear suddenly. It is built layer by layer through decades of neglect, arrogance, and denial. By the time it is visible, it is already too late. And so America's greatest weakness is not its enemies, not its rivals, not even its internal divisions. It is the illusion that it is above weakness itself. That illusion has become its shield, but also its trap. For a shield can only protect as long as it is real. Once the shield is revealed to be an illusion, the blows land directly, and they land harder than ever before. Invincibility is not strength. It is blindness disguised as power. And blindness is the beginning of downfall. At the heart of America's power lies an economic engine, unlike any other in history. It is a system designed to consume, expand, and project influence on a global scale. But that same engine carries within it a dangerous flaw: dependence without discipline. The country thrives on credit, on borrowing from the future to maintain comfort in the present, on importing what it could produce, and on consuming more than it creates. This is not the symptom of strength. It is the architecture of fragility. Dependence becomes inevitable when a society convinces itself that resources, innovation, and global dominance will forever flow in its favor. Discipline becomes unnecessary when the illusion persists that the supply of prosperity will never run dry. Yet history shows again and again that nations fall not when they lack resources, but when they lack the discipline to use them wisely. Consider the way debt has become normalized. For individuals, for corporations, for the government itself, debt is no longer an emergency, but a way of life. Families stretch credit cards, corporations rely on loans to expand, governments raise ceilings as though limits do not exist. The reasoning is always the same. Tomorrow will bring growth, and growth will erase the burden of today. But what if tomorrow does not bring growth? What if tomorrow brings stagnation, recession, or worse, collapse? This dependence on perpetual growth without the discipline to balance against risk creates a system that is not resilient, but fragile. It is a system that looks unbreakable, only because it has not yet been tested to its limit. Consumption, too, reflects this dependence. America consumes more energy, food, and goods per capita than nearly any nation on earth, yet it has allowed production to drift abroad in search of lower costs. This is not efficiency. It is vulnerability disguised as convenience. Factories close, industries hollow out, supply chains stretch across oceans, and the assumption is that they will never fail. But as global shocks have revealed, supply chains are fragile, and dependence on them is dangerous. A disciplined nation would rebuild capacity, balance production with consumption, and prepare for disruption. A dependent nation continues to rely on others, while insisting its dominance will shield it from consequence. Even in innovation, the field most celebrated as America's unassailable advantage, the pattern repeats. Technology is pushed forward at astonishing speed, but the discipline to protect, regulate, or manage it lags behind. Social media platforms spread influence, but also spread division. Artificial intelligence advances, yet little discipline exists to prevent misuse. Medical breakthroughs extend life, but healthcare costs rise beyond affordability. Innovation without discipline becomes chaos, and dependence on innovation as a cure for every flaw becomes a weakness, not a strength. The faith that something new will save us blinds the nation to the reality that discipline, not novelty, sustains power. The political system mirrors this same pattern. Parties and leaders speak in promises of endless benefits, more programs, more spending, more relief, more rights. Rarely is a conversation about restraint, about sacrifice, about what cannot be sustained indefinitely. Politicians are rewarded for feeding dependence because discipline wins no votes. Citizens, in turn, demand comfort without cost, protection without responsibility, and benefits without limits. This cycle reinforces itself until the idea of shared sacrifice, once a defining strength, becomes a relic of history. A society addicted to comfort cannot endure hardship, and hardship is inevitable in the life cycle of every nation. On the global stage, dependence is perhaps most visible in the dominance of the dollar. For decades, America's currency has been the backbone of global trade, giving it leverage, stability, and unmatched influence. But this dominance has bred complacency. Rather than discipline in fiscal policy, the assumption has been that the dollar will always hold supremacy. Trillions can be printed, deficits can balloon, and the world will continue to rely on America's financial system. But cracks are appearing. Rivals are exploring alternatives. Trade is shifting to new currencies, and the world is not as dependent on the dollar as it once was. If that dominance fades, America's dependence will be revealed for what it truly is, a dangerous overconfidence in a system sustained not by discipline but by habit. This pattern of dependence without discipline also reflects a cultural shift. Earlier generations were shaped by scarcity, by wars that demanded sacrifice, by depressions that taught restraint, by struggles that required endurance. Discipline was not optional, it was survival. Today, abundance has erased that memory. The culture teaches instant gratification, not patience. It celebrates excess, not restraint. It glorifies consumption, not preservation. Dependence is no longer seen as a weakness, but as entitlement. And discipline is no longer a virtue, but an inconvenience. This cultural erosion is more dangerous than any economic imbalance because it shapes the mindset of an entire generation. A society that does not value discipline cannot endure crisis, and crisis always arrives sooner or later. Even in security, the same principle applies. America has the most powerful military in the world, but it is also deeply dependent on maintaining that power at unsustainable cost. The nation spends more on defense than entire regions combined, yet often struggles with efficiency, strategy, and discipline in how those resources are deployed. Military might is projected outward, but internal security, cyber threats, infrastructure, social cohesion receives less attention. Dependence on projecting power externally without discipline internally creates an imbalance. Strength abroad cannot compensate for fragility at home. What makes dependence without discipline so dangerous is that it does not appear as weakness until it is too late. To the casual observer, America still looks unshakable. Its economy is vast, its culture dominant, its military unmatched, its technology advanced. But beneath the surface, the foundations are hollowing. The debt grows, the divisions widen, the supply chains stretch, the culture erodes, and the discipline fades. These weaknesses are not visible in daily life because they accumulate slowly, layer upon layer, until one day they converge into crisis. Dependence provides comfort in the short term. Lack of discipline ensures disaster in the long term. The danger is not that America lacks strength. The danger is that it has forgotten the principles that sustain strength. Dependence on credit, on consumption, on innovation, on global dominance, on military power. All these could be sustainable if paired with discipline. But without discipline, dependence becomes a trap. The more the nation leans on these pillars, the less it questions whether they can endure. And when the pillars give way, the collapse is swift, because no structure built on dependence alone can withstand the test of time. No external rival, no foreign adversary, no global competitor poses a threat as dangerous as the forces eroding a nation from within. America has long measured its power by comparing itself to others. Its military against foreign armies, its economy against rival markets, its innovation against global challengers. Yet history has shown that civilizations rarely collapse because of what their enemies did to them. They collapse because of what they did to themselves. The true enemy is not across the ocean or hidden in a rival's strategy room. It is embedded in the divisions, complacency, and arrogance that slowly eat away at the very structure of a society. America's greatest weakness is not what comes from the outside, but what grows unchecked on the inside. The first and most visible internal threat is division. A nation that once prided itself on unity now struggles to agree on its most basic truths. Politics is no longer a debate of ideas, but a battlefield where every disagreement is a war, every opponent an enemy, every compromise a betrayal. This culture of division has seeped into daily life, poisoning communities, breaking families, and eroding trust in institutions. A country at war with itself cannot effectively face challenges from outside because its strength is wasted in internal conflict. Instead of building resilience, it burns its energy in endless battles that weaken its capacity to act as one. Division is not just disagreement. It is the fracture of collective will. And without a collective will, even the strongest nation becomes fragile. Complacency adds another layer to this weakness. America has achieved so much in the past that it assumes achievement will always be its destiny. Citizens take prosperity for granted, assuming the comforts of modern life are permanent. Leaders assume global dominance is guaranteed, failing to prepare for a future where rivals grow stronger. Institutions assume their credibility will endure, even as corruption, inefficiency, and mistrust corrode their foundations. This complacency is perhaps the most insidious enemy within, because it does not announce itself loudly. It whispers. It convinces people that nothing truly threatens them, that past victories are proof of future safety. By the time complacency reveals its cost, it is too late. The structures have already weakened. Arrogance compounds these dangers. America projects confidence not only to the world, but also inward, telling itself a story of exceptionalism, of being untouchable, of standing above history itself. Arrogance blinds the nation to the warning signs of decline. It convinces leaders to ignore the lessons of past empires. It convinces citizens that sacrifice is unnecessary because dominance is natural. Arrogance silences critics, mocks warnings, and dismisses the possibility that the nation could one day face the same fate as those that came before. Yet, history is merciless to arrogance. Rome, once the unshakable empire, fell not because it lacked power, but because it believed its power eternal. The British Empire, spanning continents, declined because it underestimated the will of its colonies and the limits of its reach. Arrogance blinds, and blindness leads to downfall. The enemy within also thrives in the erosion of trust. Trust is the invisible glue that binds societies together, and without it, every institution begins to crack. Citizens lose faith in their government, believing it serves only itself. Communities lose faith in one another, retreating into isolation and suspicion. Workers lose faith in corporations that prioritize profit over people. Generations lose faith in the future, convinced they will inherit less than their parents. This breakdown of trust is not an external attack. It is self-inflicted. Once trust is lost, rebuilding it becomes almost impossible. And without trust, unity cannot survive. And without unity, resilience cannot endure. The culture of distraction further empowers the enemy within. Technology has connected the world in ways unimaginable, but it has also fragmented attention, shortened patience, and eroded focus. Citizens drown in endless streams of entertainment, news cycles, and digital noise, leaving little space for reflection, discipline, or long-term thinking. A society addicted to distraction cannot address its deepest flaws because it is too busy reacting to the immediate. This addiction creates fertile ground for manipulation, for misinformation, for division, to spread unchecked. The enemy within does not need to destroy a society directly. It only needs to distract it until it destroys itself. Another dimension of this internal enemy lies in the decline of shared values. Once there was a sense of collective identity, of shared responsibility, of a common pursuit of progress. Today, identity is fragmented, responsibility is evaded, and progress is defined in competing, often contradictory ways. Without shared values, a nation cannot endure crisis. Crisis demands sacrifice, unity, and trust in a common purpose. Without them, every challenge becomes an opportunity for blame, every hardship a reason for division, every obstacle a justification for retreat. The erosion of shared values is not just cultural decline. It is structural collapse waiting to happen. Economically, The enemy within shows itself through unsustainable habits. The pursuit of profit at any cost creates inequality, eroding the middle class that once defined American strength. The addiction to consumption over production hollows out industries. The obsession with short-term gains undermines long-term stability. These are not external forces imposed by rivals. They are choices made internally, willingly, repeatedly. Each choice feeds dependence, deepens fragility, and widens the gap between appearance and reality. The economic machine looks powerful, but within it runs a logic that cannot sustain itself forever. Even in the realm of security, the enemy within is evident. The nation invests billions in defense, yet its own citizens feel unsafe from crime, instability, or social collapse. The infrastructure that supports daily life, bridges, roads, power grids, is aging, underfunded, and vulnerable. Cybersecurity remains fragile, leaving institutions exposed to attacks that require no armies, no weapons, just a computer and intent. These vulnerabilities are not the result of foreign brilliance. They are the result of domestic neglect. The greatest enemy is not the rival who strikes it. It is the refusal to prepare for the strike. What makes the enemy within so dangerous is that it disguises itself as normal life. Division becomes everyday politics. Complacency becomes everyday culture. Arrogance becomes everyday pride. Distrust becomes everyday conversation. Inequality becomes everyday economy. Fragility becomes everyday infrastructure. These enemies do not attack with bombs or armies. They attack quietly, slowly, until the strength of a nation has already rotted from the inside. And by the time the rot is undeniable, the collapse is already inevitable. The truth is simple, yet uncomfortable. America is not most threatened by those who wish it harm from the outside. It is most threatened by its inability to recognize the harm it inflicts on itself. The cracks are visible for anyone who chooses to see them. The danger is not that the cracks exist. The danger is that they are ignored, dismissed, or mocked until one day the structure they weaken gives way entirely. Technology has long been hailed as America's ultimate strength, the engine that propelled the nation to the forefront of global power, the tool that reshaped industries, transformed warfare, and redefined culture. From Silicon Valley breakthroughs to space exploration, from the microchip to the smartphone, technology has been the story America tells the world about its ingenuity and dominance. Yet within this story lies a dangerous truth. Technology is not only a source of power, it is also a source of weakness. What once united society in progress now divides it in distraction. What once empowered individuals now enslaves them in dependence. What once created resilience now creates fragility. Technology is a double-edged sword, and America wields it without the discipline to understand the consequences. The first edge of this sword is innovation. America has produced some of the most groundbreaking advancements of the modern era, from the internet to artificial intelligence, from biotech revolutions to defense technologies. These have secured economic leadership, military superiority, and cultural dominance, but the other edge cuts deeper. Each innovation carries risks that are often ignored in the rush to profit or dominate. The internet connected billions, but it also created platforms of misinformation and addiction. Artificial intelligence promises efficiency, but it also threatens jobs and raises ethical dilemmas that remain unresolved. Biotechnology pushes the boundaries of health, yet it also raises questions of inequality and misuse. Innovation without responsibility creates dangers as vast as the opportunities it provides. and America often charges forward without pausing to control the consequences. This lack of discipline is most visible in the culture of distraction. Technology has become not just a tool, but an environment, a constant stream of content designed to capture attention, shorten focus, and feed consumption. Social media platforms thrive on outrage and division, turning citizens against one another while algorithms exploit their impulses. The nation that once built technology to solve problems now uses it to escape them. Screens dominate homes, schools, and workplaces. While human connection weakens, patience evaporates, and critical thought erodes. The double edge of technology is clear. The same systems that could elevate knowledge have become systems that manufacture ignorance. The strength of innovation has been turned against the society that created it. In the economic realm, the double-edged nature of technology reveals itself through dependency. Entire industries rely on fragile digital infrastructures, global supply chains, and automated systems. Efficiency is celebrated, but resilience is forgotten. A cyber attack, a system failure, or a disruption in semiconductor supply could paralyze the economy. Yet little discipline is applied to prepare for these possibilities. The more advanced the technology, the greater the dependence, and the greater the vulnerability when it falters. The irony is stark. The nation that prides itself on strength is most fragile in the very systems that define its modern power. Even in warfare, the same paradox emerges. America's military dominance is built on superior technology, drones, satellites, cyber capabilities. Yet this dependence also creates new forms of vulnerability. An enemy does not need tanks or missiles to inflict damage. They need only to disrupt the networks that guide America's weapons, the systems that power its grids, or the databases that manage its logistics. The reliance on high-tech tools becomes a liability when those tools are compromised. Wars are no longer fought solely on the battlefield. They are fought in servers, satellites, and networks. America's strength in military technology is real, but so is the weakness embedded in its overdependence. The social consequences of this double-edged sword are profound. Technology promised connection, but it delivered division. Communities that once bonded face-to-face now fracture into digital tribes. Opinions harden in echo chambers. Empathy erodes in anonymity. And truth itself becomes contested in the chaos of manipulated information. Technology has amplified every voice, but it has also amplified every lie. The society that should be more informed than ever before is instead more polarized, more suspicious, and more divided. This is not the fault of technology alone. It is the result of a nation that embraced innovation without discipline, speed without reflection, progress without caution. Another edge of this sword cuts into the realm of labor and economy. Automation, robotics, and artificial intelligence increase productivity, but also displace millions of workers. The promise of technology is that it creates new industries, new jobs, new opportunities. The danger is that it does so unevenly, leaving entire classes of people behind. Wealth concentrates in the hands of those who own the technology, while those who depend on wages face uncertainty. The gap widens between those who benefit from innovation and those who suffer from its disruption. Without discipline, this gap becomes permanent, creating resentment, instability, and a society where technology divides as much as it unites. The educational system reflects this imbalance. Technology has brought unprecedented access to information, but access does not equal wisdom. Students can search answers instantly, yet struggle with critical thinking. Teachers rely on screens, yet human mentorship declines. Knowledge is vast, yet understanding is shallow. The discipline to teach discernment, patience, and depth of thought has been overshadowed by the excitement of instant information. A generation raised on digital tools risks losing the very skills that sustain resilience: focus, memory, problem solving, and reflection. The double edge cuts here as well. Tools designed to educate may instead weaken the capacity to truly learn. In culture, technology has reshaped identity itself. The digital persona has become as important as the physical self, with individuals curating images, chasing validation, and measuring worth in likes and shares. The nation that once defined success through achievement now defines it through visibility. This shift corrodes values, replacing depth with appearance, substance with performance. The double edge of technology lies in its ability to create a world where image matters more than reality, and where people lose themselves in the roles they perform rather than the lives they live. Even the environment bears the marks of this paradox. Technology drives industries that consume resources at unsustainable rates, producing pollution, waste, and climate disruption. At the same time, it offers tools for renewable energy, conservation, and sustainability. But without discipline, the destructive edge outpaces the constructive one. America continues to build and consume without fully applying its technology to repair the damage it causes. The tools exist, but the will does not. Progress becomes destructive when it is pursued without balance. The greatest irony of all is that America's identity is bound so tightly to technology that it no longer questions whether every advancement is necessary or wise. The pursuit of the next big thing overshadows the responsibility to manage the consequences of the last big thing. Progress is celebrated even when it creates more problems than it solves. The double-edged sword of technology does not simply exist. It thrives because discipline is absent. Innovation races forward, but reflection lags behind, leaving a gap wide enough for fragility to take root. The truth is that technology has not betrayed America. America has betrayed itself by mistaking innovation for wisdom, by embracing dependence without caution, by allowing the sword it forged to turn against it. Every tool created holds the potential to build or to break, to strengthen or to weaken, to unite or to divide. And the more powerful the tool, the more devastating the consequences when wielded without restraint. For generations, America has stood at the center of the world, setting the tone of politics, finance, culture, and military power. It has been the conductor of the global orchestra, the one nation that not only played its own tune, but also dictated the rhythm for others. Yet the stage on which it performs has changed, and the audience is no longer listening in the same way. The rise of new powers, the rebalancing of economies, and the reshaping of alliances mark what can only be called a global shift. America's greatest weakness is not simply that this shift is happening, but that it refuses to adapt to it. The assumption that the world will always orbit around Washington, New York, and Silicon Valley has blinded the nation to the reality that the world is increasingly multipolar and power no longer flows in a single direction. The economic landscape offers the clearest evidence. For decades, America dominated trade, innovation, and financial systems, with the dollar serving as the anchor of global commerce. Today, rivals are building alternative frameworks. Emerging economies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are no longer passive participants in a system led by the West. They are crafting their own paths, trading with each other, and building institutions that exclude American oversight. China has established financial networks that bypass the dollar. Europe is seeking autonomy in energy and defense, and regional blocs are deepening ties that reduce dependence on American leadership. The shift is undeniable. While America continues to consume and spend, other nations are producing, saving, and building. The balance of economic gravity is tilting away from the singular dominance of the United States. In politics, the same trend is visible. The unipolar moment that followed the Cold War, where America stood unchallenged as the global leader, has faded. Russia, despite economic challenges, asserts influence through energy and military maneuvers. China projects power through infrastructure, trade, and a growing military presence. Smaller nations, once dependent, now leverage regional alliances to resist unilateral American demands. Even traditional allies question the reliability of American leadership, seeking alternatives to ensure their own security and stability. Where once America's word carried unmatched authority, it is now one voice among many. The refusal to recognize this erosion of singular authority is part of the weakness, because pretending leadership is unshaken does not restore it. It accelerates its decline. Culturally, too. The world is no longer captivated solely by American influence. Hollywood, music, and technology once defined global trends almost unchallenged. Today, South Korea shapes pop culture, India dominates digital entertainment markets, and China crafts its own platforms. Insulated from American giants, content flows in multiple directions, and while American culture remains powerful, it is no longer the unquestioned global standard. The global shift is not about America disappearing. It is about America becoming one of many voices instead of the only one. Yet the nation clings to the belief that its cultural influence is eternal, blind to the reality that new generations worldwide are building identities shaped by diverse influences. The shift is also evident in technology and innovation. America still leads in many areas, but it no longer holds a monopoly. China has advanced rapidly in fields like 5G, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. Europe is pushing strict regulations that define the global rules of technology more than American companies do. Nations once seen as consumers of American technology are now creators and competitors. The global marketplace of ideas and inventions has become broader, and dominance is no longer guaranteed. Yet America continues to act as if its supremacy in innovation is unassailable, ignoring the ways in which rivals are catching up, and in some areas surpassing it. In military power, America remains unmatched in sheer scale, but even this advantage is being tested by the global shift. Rivals do not seek to match America tank for tank or ship for ship. They exploit asymmetry, focusing on cyber warfare, regional influence, and new technologies that circumvent traditional power. America maintains bases across the world, but the cost of sustaining this footprint grows heavier, while adversaries need only destabilize specific regions to achieve their goals. The shift in military dynamics is not about a direct challenge to American supremacy, but about undermining the very structures on which that supremacy depends. A nation stretched thin cannot forever maintain the illusion of invulnerability, especially when the world around it changes tactics. One of the most striking aspects of the global shift is the redefinition of alliances. Where once America dictated the terms of global order, nations now pursue pragmatic relationships based on interests, not ideology. Countries trade with both America and its rivals, partner on security with one hand while negotiating with competitors with the other. Loyalty to American leadership is no longer assumed, because nations see themselves not as followers but as independent actors in a multipolar world. America, however, continues to expect deference, struggling to adjust to a reality where influence must be earned, not demanded. This inability to adapt to the changing nature of alliances is a weakness that erodes credibility further. The shift also exposes the contradiction between America's domestic fragility and its global ambitions. While rivals focus on building infrastructure, education, and long-term strategy, America is consumed by internal division, political paralysis, and short-term thinking. A global leader distracted by its own dysfunction cannot guide others effectively. The world sees this clearly. The government shutdowns, the partisan gridlock, the social unrest. These images broadcast across the globe weaken not just America's credibility, but its very claim to leadership. A nation struggling to govern itself cannot convincingly lecture others on governance. The environmental sphere adds yet another dimension to the global shift. Climate change is reshaping geopolitics, with nations competing for control over resources, routes, and influence in a warming world. While America debates the existence and scope of the problem, other nations are racing to dominate green technologies, renewable energy, and climate policy. Leadership in the 21st century will not only be about military or economic power, it will also be about who defines the future of sustainability. In this contest, America risks falling behind, clinging to outdated energy models, while others seize the opportunity to lead in the industries of tomorrow. What makes the global shift so dangerous for America is not the rise of others. It is America's resistance to change. Rivals are not asking permission to grow stronger, and allies are not waiting for America to lead them. The world is moving, adapting, and reshaping itself, but America is still looking backward, measuring its power by old standards, insisting that dominance will last simply because it always has. This refusal to confront the new reality ensures that when the shift is complete, America will not be at the center of it. Power is not lost in a single moment. It is surrendered gradually by failing to recognize the moment when adaptation is necessary. The global shift is not a threat to be stopped. It is a reality to be faced. America's weakness is not that the world is changing, but that it cannot accept the change. It clings to the myth of eternal supremacy, even as the balance of power, culture, and influence evolves around it. The greatest danger lies not in rivals gaining strength, but in America losing the humility to adapt, the discipline to prepare, and the vision to lead in a world where leadership looks different than it did before. Every great nation reaches a moment when it must confront itself, a point where denial can no longer cover reality, where strength is tested not by what it projects, but by what it admits. For America, that moment has arrived. The true weakness is not economic, not political, not even military. It is the refusal to acknowledge fragility. This is the heart of the wake-up call. A nation cannot correct what it refuses to see. A society cannot heal what it insists does not exist. The greatest danger lies not in the problems themselves, but in the silence, the arrogance, and the blindness that prevent their recognition. The wake-up call is not a whisper anymore. It is a siren, but America continues to cover its ears. The refusal to admit weakness is woven deeply into the culture. America tells itself a story of exceptionalism, of being unique, of standing above history's cycles of rise and fall. This story fuels confidence, ambition, and resilience, but it also feeds delusion. When a nation believes it is immune to decline, it resists change, avoids sacrifice, and dismisses warning signs. The wake-up call is clear. Greatness is not permanent, and ignoring decline does not prevent it. The very act of refusing to confront fragility accelerates it. Nations collapse not when they face threats, but when they believe themselves too strong to ever face them. This denial is evident in the economy. Debt rises to unsustainable levels, yet the conversation is framed as if it can continue forever. Consumption outpaces production, yet no one wants to discuss restraint. Inequality grows, but the narrative insists opportunity is boundless. Each of these issues could be addressed with discipline and reform, but that requires admitting that the system is vulnerable. Instead, leaders repeat the myth of endless growth, endless credit, endless dominance. The wake-up call is already ringing in every financial crisis, every inflationary surge, every supply chain breakdown. Yet the response is not recognition but temporary fixes that restore comfort while leaving fragility untouched. In politics, the same blindness prevails. Division has reached levels that paralyze governance, yet both sides insist the system is strong enough to endure indefinitely. Trust in institutions erodes, but officials declare confidence to avoid panic. Citizens lose faith in their leaders, but leaders respond with performance rather than reform. The wake-up call is loud here. A democracy cannot survive if its people stop believing in it. The strength of institutions lies not in their existence, but in their legitimacy. Once legitimacy is gone, the structure crumbles. Yet instead of confronting this truth, denial continues, with each side blaming the other, while the foundation weakens. Socially, the wake-up call demands attention to fractures that are widening daily. Communities are torn apart by polarization, misinformation, and cultural battles. Mental health crises rise, yet they are dismissed as individual failings rather than systemic consequences. Families struggle with economic insecurity, yet the myth of prosperity masks the pain. The social fabric frays in visible ways, but the nation insists it is still united. The wake-up call is visible in the faces of those left behind, in the anger of those who feel unheard, in the despair of those who see no path forward. To ignore these voices is to deepen the fracture, to refuse to admit that unity is weakening. Culturally, the refusal to confront fragility is reinforced by distraction. Technology floods daily life with entertainment, outrage, and endless streams of content. The wake-up call is drowned out by noise. People are too busy scrolling, consuming, reacting to pause and reflect on what is happening around them. The attention of an entire society is captured, leaving little room for awareness of deeper issues. In this way, the wake-up call becomes not only about admitting fragility, but about fighting for the ability to even hear it amid the noise. Without focus, without reflection, without awareness, denial becomes effortless and fragility grows unchecked. On the global stage, the wake-up call is even more urgent. America is no longer the sole leader of the world. Rivals rise, alliances shift, and influence spreads across multiple centers of power. Yet the nation continues to act as though its dominance is unchallenged. The wake-up call is visible in trade disputes, in shifting currencies, in international skepticism toward American leadership. To refuse to recognize this shift is to risk being left behind in the very system it once controlled. Adaptation requires humility. The humility to admit that others are rising, that leadership must be earned anew, that the old ways no longer suffice. Without that humility, fragility becomes failure. The environment amplifies the urgency of this wake-up call. Climate change, resource depletion, and natural disasters demand long-term vision and sacrifice. Yet America resists clinging to outdated industries, debating the very existence of the crisis, and postponing action. The wake-up call is already here in wildfires, floods, hurricanes, and heat waves. These are not distant warnings, but present realities. To deny them is to gamble with survival, and yet the refusal to confront fragility persists, as though nature itself can be bent to will. The wake-up call is not only political or economic, it is existential. The heart of this wake-up call lies in the mindset of the people. A society trained to expect comfort resists sacrifice. A culture built on abundance denies scarcity. A nation accustomed to leading refuses to imagine following. This mindset is the greatest fragility of all, because it ensures that when crisis comes, the response will not be unity and resilience, but shock and paralysis. The wake-up call is an invitation to shift this mindset, to rediscover the discipline, sacrifice, and humility that once built strength. Without this shift, no reform, no innovation, no policy will be enough. The lesson of history is brutal and clear. Empires fall not because they lack power, but because they lack the will to confront their decline. They mistook pride for strength, denial for stability, and arrogance for permanence. The wake-up call for America is the chance to avoid that fate. But to seize that chance, the nation must abandon the illusion that it cannot fail. It must look directly at its fragility, admit it, and act with urgency. Anything less ensures that the call will not be heeded. And when ignored long enough, every wake-up call becomes a final warning.